If you've been following my channel for a while, you might have noticed I've never reviewed one of Unique Melody's MESTs, aka the MEST. But also, if you've been following my Squiglink website, you might have noticed that I have graphed the original MEST. I have graphed the MEST Mark II, and on the Mark II specifically, I have given it a 5-star rating because while I never reviewed it, when I heard it, literally years ago at this point, I was super impressed. And so while I did never review that IEM, we do now have the follow-up, the MEST Jet Black version. And well, does it stand up to my memory of the Mark II? Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review. And for the past month or so, couple of weeks at least, I've been listening to the new Unique Melody MEST Jet Black version. And I'm ready to let you know what I think. I've been comparing this with other IEMs in its price range, which for the record is an expensive price range. This is about a $1,700 IEM, but also comparing it honestly a lot with just my memory of the Mark II, because the Mark II was a really impressive IEM when I heard it, but also a really impressive kind of legendary IEM in the space when it came out. But that was about 5 years ago. So does this live up? That's what we're going to talk about in this review. But before we get to that, a quick shout out to Unique Melody for sending in the MEST Jet Black version for review. If you want to check it out, of course, I'm going to have them linked in the description down below. But with that said, let's go back to the table. We'll talk about what comes inside the box, the build quality, fit and comfort, all that stuff. And then of course, we're going to talk about the sound of this IEM, what it graphs like, what it sounds like to my ear. And then I'll bring in a couple of other IEMs at a similar price point to compare and give you kind of a good idea of where the Jet Black version of the MEST sits amongst current IEMs in 2025. Okay, with that said, here is the box, the packaging. It is a box. It is a nice box, I suppose. And this is what you get in the box, which is actually kind of a lot, to be honest. We'll start with the less fun stuff, and then we'll get into talking about the IEM, but it comes with a nice carry case, which I will, of course, say is too large for my personal uses, but it is nonetheless a well-built case. You can see that it's got a zipper all around. It is, soft and padded on the inside. It also comes with little individual compartments for the IEMs, as well as little individual booties if you really want to protect your IEMs. And again, this is an expensive IEM, so you would certainly be, I guess, excused for wanting to protect them. Although again, this is all personally a little bit overkill for me. There's also in here like a little warranty card, gives you your serial number, manufacture date, how long your warranty is going on. And I guess that's kind of nice to see. But apart from that, you also get a little cable tie, which might be useful. We'll talk about the cable in a little bit, as well as a microfiber towel with a plethora of ear tips. And I like to see this. So let's punch in this real quick. Just to highlight, it comes with 3 different styles of silicone ear tips. No foam tips in the box, which is interesting. Not bad for me. I don't really like foam ear tips, but the 3 different styles here, like this is the one that is pre-installed on the IEM. I'll call this kind of like the stock ear tip, and a fairly standard, somewhat wide bore silicone ear tip with a unique, what do we call this? Like a turquoise color? It looks interesting, but apart from that, the ear tips are pretty standard. And then over here, you've got 2 different sets of silicone ear tips, which might look about the same, but they are actually a little bit different. And you'll notice that if I put them up on their side here, this set of tips over here, they have like this interesting pedal cut out on them. I don't know that they necessarily do anything particularly different, but they certainly look different. And what I will say is that these were the ear tips I gravitated toward initially because it's unique. I've never tried these things before, but I personally don't think that this is the best fit for this IEM, as we'll talk about a little bit more when we talk about the sound on this IEM. So all IEMs are pretty sensitive to ear tip selection. I'll say that the MEST Jet Black is especially sensitive to ear tip selection. And for my ear, while these things look pretty cool, they did not end up being the best. I will also maybe just quickly note, they are a little bit on the thin-walled side. So if you struggle with getting a seal with these ear tips, I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe try using the smaller sizes. The larger side is just going to have a bigger issue with the walls kind of collapsing and not creating a seal. But you might also not run into that issue. I think you will probably run into that issue a little bit more with the pedal cut versions though, rather than these. But anyway, that is enough talking about the ear tips and enough talking about the accessories in general. So let's talk about the build quality on the IEM itself, starting with, of course, the cable. Now you will note that there is no swappable termination accessories that I've highlighted yet, because there is no swappable termination on this cable. In fact, from what I could see on the website, I was checking out, I think, Music Tech's website, there's only the option to buy this with a 4.4 mil connector, which, you know how I feel about 4.4 mil connectors. It's kind of unnecessary. Of course, it works, and it is a nicely built cable nonetheless, but I would certainly prefer to have a 3.5 personally, if you'd like my feedback on that. Apart from that, the cable is, again, it is a nicely built cable. It is obviously quite blingy and flashy looking. This is, you know, if you're spending $1,700 on an IEM, you probably don't want something that looks totally ordinary, and this definitely looks more than ordinary. But I am going to say that I actually kind of think this cable is just the wrong match for this IEM, and I'll tell you exactly why. Like, I like that the cable is relatively thin and lightweight, although the 4.4 here, you could club a person pretty hard with that if you wanted to. Don't do it. But it does have, you know, a decent looking Y split here. The chin slider is basically not useful. It just super loose on these relatively thin upper cables. And yeah, the upper cable is pretty thin. And the reason why I think that this is just kind of a bad match for these IEMs is that, well, one of the big differences with the Jet Black version is these shells, right? The other MESTs, at least the ones that I've tried, they come in kind of like a hollow resin shell. These are made out of a ceramic, I believe, and they actually look quite cool. I guess I'll talk a little bit more about these in a little bit, but I'm still kind of sticking on the topic of the cable. The issue is just that these earpieces are quite heavy, and having heavy earpieces plus a thin cable just ends up being, in my opinion, a bad recipe. I think for a heavy IEM like this, you want to have a heavyweight cable as well to just kind of support it and frankly just prevent tangling, because this cable with the heavy earpieces and the, I don't know, relatively aggressive ear hooks just means that it ends up getting tangled quite a bit as I'm handling the IEM. I ended up instead using this cable, which might not look any thicker than this one. Okay, never mind. It does look quite a bit thicker. This is just the Dunu cable. It's a little bit on the heavyweight side, and I found was a much better match for these IEM pieces. Now, I guess that will lead us into talking about the IEMs. Oh wait, no, briefly, just to highlight, it is on a 2-pin connector. So of course you can replace it. It is slightly recessed too. So yeah, easy to replace, but I don't know, would be nice if I didn't feel the need to. Now the earpieces themselves, I've already kind of highlighted, are heavy and made out of ceramic. And well, I think they actually look really cool. You know, the original MEST and especially the Mark II, they were cool looking resin shells, but they were also kind of just like a generic, you know, take a resin shell, throw some gold leaf at it, and they looked interesting, but also maybe a little bit on the forgettable side, especially in 2025, where that aesthetic is pretty common. Now this, I'm gonna say, is not very common. I think this thing actually looks really cool as is. It's interesting, I didn't even notice here until I'm looking at it now that it's got these little screws that almost look hexagonal and inset, and the, I don't know, are these functional? Kind of feel like they're probably not functional, because you can notice that the slit on the screws are all pointed in exactly the same direction, which screws don't usually let you do, but it's a cool look nonetheless. And again, the shells are a little bit on the heavyweight side, but you can see that the shape and design of them on the inside is, I'm gonna say, moderately semi-custom in design. It's not as aggressively molded as some other semi-customs, but it is, I would say, sufficiently well molded to the point that it fits well in my ear and it is nice and stable, provided you get a nice deep fit. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more in a bit. But you can see the nozzle is a little bit on the long side, but you know, not especially long. And oh, I guess we should measure this nozzle for you nozzle peepers real quick. Let me see, I haven't actually done this yet. We are looking at a 5.8 millimeter nozzle. So yeah, I would say that is a moderately sized nozzle. And well, it's gonna fit pretty much any ear tip. And again, I was talking about this not being the best match with the stock ear tips. For my preference, I'm going with this ear tip, which is an AudioSense AS400 ear tip, I believe is the model number on these. And I will warn, I don't know, the last time I went looking for these, it looked like they might have been discontinued. But why I like this is that it ends up being a little bit on the narrow side, and it also kind of like pivots in almost like a spin fit style. And these, generally I'll reach for these IEMs these ear tips, when I'm looking for an ear tip that's gonna like take a little bit of an edge off the treble, which we'll talk about that in a little bit. Anyway, apart from that, Before I throw these things in my ear, just one thing to mention about the build quality on this IEM. Unfortunately, these things suffer pretty severely from driver flex, which if you're not familiar with what driver flex is, basically there's a dynamic driver in there, which is like let's call it like a plastic membrane of some sort. And when I'm putting the IEM into my ear, it's creating kind of like this pressure situation. And that air pressure can sometimes with certain IEMs create kind of like a flexing, crinkling sound on the driver, which this is definitely one that does that. I believe the other MESTs did that as well, so I don't think it's new here to the Jet Black version. But just note that, as you fit this IEM and you do this, it's gonna squish and kind of sound like you got like water in your ear, right? That sounds like it's just kind of squishy and wet, which for me, not super pleasant, but it is the sort of thing that you're probably not gonna notice until, or except for when you're inserting the IEM into your ear, unless you're someone who likes to sleep with IEMs like I do. This was an IEM I literally could not sleep with because every time I would just lean my ear over onto my pillow, I would get that squishing sound, and it was quite distracting. So not a big fan of that. Now, the rest of the fit on the IEM, I am a fan of. It fits well. You can see that it's got, I would say size-wise, we're going to call this like a medium. Maybe you could say, I don't know, in my ear, it almost looks medium-large, but it feels pretty medium in terms of its size. Comfort's good. Fit stability is actually pretty decent, provided you get a nice purchase with the ear tips. It doesn't have anything that's going to, the custom molding isn't really slotting in and getting caught by my anti-tragus or really folding into the back of the helix or anything like that, but generally I had a pretty good experience with the fit stability of this IEM. And aesthetically, I like it. I think it is a cool looking IEM, not just because, I think it looks handsome as is, but I think it's also especially, it's a unique build. And the fact that it's made out of a ceramic is kind of cool. So it's, it's got a little something special going on with the build that I like. I just don't like the driver flex. And also I don't really like this cable. But the earpieces themselves, I dig. But how do I feel now about the sound? Let me just check my notes, make sure I'm not missing anything on the build quality. I'm not. So let's talk about the sound, and to do so, well, let's go over to Squiglink real quick. I'll pull up the frequency response graph of the MEST Jet Black. Oh, where's my labels? Hold on. We need labels on here. So this is a Jet Black version of the MEST as measured on my rig. If you want to check this out, of course, I've got linked on Squiglink in the description down below. You can compare it with literally hundreds of other IEMs, including all of the other MESTs, which or at least the ones that I've graphed, which are these ones, the original MEST and the MEST Mark II. But let's do a little bit of analysis together. And I'm also just going to say, like right off the bat, this is a weird frequency response. The MEST series has always had a pretty weird frequency response. And to be honest, like I kind of like it in a sense. Like I like that they're doing something different, right? We're talking about an IEM that costs $1,700. Do I want another IEM that just has a run-of-the-mill typical frequency response that's going for like a neutral sound signature? Maybe not. Maybe you're looking for something that does that particularly well, but also maybe you're just looking for something that is uniquely different. And I think that that is kind of what the expensive price range of IEMs kind of should be, is just like do something different, right? Maybe it's a small audience, maybe it's something that a lot of people like, but maybe it's something that's going to be a little bit out there. And the MEST is definitely a little bit out there, including now the Jet Black version. What's so out there about this frequency response? Okay, we'll see that it does have a fairly common looking bass boost. I will say right off the bat, this is not a particularly bassy IEM. What's particularly strange though is that you can see that usually, versus like my target, you'll have kind of like a downward slope from the bass to about 1 kilohertz. And then you have what we call the pinna gain from 1 kilohertz up to about 3 kilohertz. The MEST has always eschewed that. And instead, it down tilts until about 300 hertz. And then you have what I guess you could call the pinna gain starting at 300 hertz. I wouldn't really call it that because that's not exactly what's going on here. But nonetheless, it is, you're getting this kind of rise from 300 hertz up to about 2500 kilohertz or 2500 hertz, which is very, very unique. You'll also see that it is quite relaxed here in kind of like the upper mid range, which is where I conceptually put kind of like vocal forwardness, right? Like how forward are the vocals? They're not that forward in this set. And honestly, like looking at this frequency response, when I had seen these frequency response graphs from these IEMs before, I expected that this would be kind of like a warm, laid back set because there's just not a whole lot of forwardness here in the upper mid range. But when I first heard the IEMs, very quickly changed my mind. That is not what these things sound like. In fact, if anything, these IEMs, including the Jet Black version, sound quite bright. I think basically relaxing this right here just gives you, it kind of unmasks the treble. And while you can see that there is some treble emphasis here, kind of the mid-treble region, this isn't super uncommon. You'll see kind of this amount of treble in a bunch of different IEMs, but it nonetheless just comes across overall as a bright, exciting sounding IEM. Would you call this neutral? No, I would not call this neutral. Would you call this warm and rich? No, you would not call it that. But it is nonetheless kind of an exciting, lively, bright, open sound that has a decent bass boost on it as well. But I wouldn't call this like a warm, boomy, bass dominant sound signature by any stretch of the imagination. So that's kind of like the analysis, the squig analysis that we can make there. But what can I say about how this IEM sounds to my ear? And I guess actually I didn't talk about this in the intro, just as kind of like a, maybe this is even on the box. One of the things that's kind of unique about the MEST is the driver configuration. It's always been something that's pretty unique about the MEST, is that it's been, I think, the first that I knew about IEM that has a bone conduction driver. And in fact, it's not just one bone conduction driver. They actually have a couple of bone conduction drivers. In fact, this is a quad bridge set because it's got a dynamic driver for the bass, it's got balanced armatures, ESTs, and bone conduction drivers. And I don't know if it's something unique for the Jet Black version, but they're advertising it as like a hybrid bone conduction driver thing. It's got two different styles of bone conduction drivers. I don't know how much the bone conduction stuff matters. I'll be honest, I don't try to speculate on this kind of thing. Personally, I am not, I'm curious about what kind of drivers are put into IEMs like this, but I do not make purchasing decisions based on the drivers that are in them. And I also don't really come across or come away with a lot of listening impressions that I'm going to attribute to the drivers. So just know that it does have a unique driver configuration and it does sound a little bit different maybe than I would expect based on the frequency response. Is that because of the drivers? I don't really care, to be honest. But what does this thing actually sound like to my ear? Well, it's an exciting sound. I've already talked about that. But honestly, I get maybe even just stepping back, like I mentioned that I thought the MEST Mark II was like a 5-star IEM. And for me, it wasn't because of the tonality, because it's not like a neutral sounding set. It's not nailing my perfect tonal balance, but it is super impressive in terms of its technical performance. And that is absolutely still true here with the Jet Black version, provided you get the right ear tips, okay? The imaging is super impressive in this set. I mean, there's a word that I don't see it get thrown around as much as I used to maybe a couple of years ago, but holographic, right? Basically just the sense that, the stereo image that's being drawn by the sound signature of an IEM might give you just this really strong sense of separation between instruments, this positioning of the vocalist inside the mix, and really present just this wide sense of head stage. And that is something that the previous MESTs have always done, and I think is also still true here of the Jet Black version. It is incisive in its treble, although I will say that versus the Mark II, at least in the frequency response graph, it's a little bit relaxed in kind of the upper treble. It still has all of these same characteristics that I remember of the Mark II. The bass, I would also say, is nice and deep and punchy. It is tight bass. It is not at all a bloated bass, although as we saw, it is a little bit on the emphasized bass side. A song, I've talked about this often, Cigarettes After Sex, Stop Waiting, just Cigarettes After Sex in general, they have a lot of like kind of dominant droning bass guitar. And on a set that's too bassy, it can kind of come across just like muddy or just a little bit overwhelming. And that is not at all the effect that you get here on the MEST. Is this like the mid-bassiest, punchy kind of kick drum sort of sound? It does a decent job with kick drums, honestly, but no, it's not going to be kind of the set that's going to give you a lot of physicality out of kick drums. But what you do get is a decent bit of punch and a very satisfying sub-bass extension on the set. Now, all that said, these are the reasons why I liked the original, well, the MEST Mark II, and all reasons that I still like the MEST Jet Black. But there are trade-offs to be considered here, okay? That tonality that I described, okay, it's not exactly neutral, but it's not like so far outside the realm of neutral that it can't sound natural and normal, right? Nothing particularly sounds like instantly off to me, but it is quite bright. And having that amount of treble on this can make the IEMs sound a little bit on the sibilant side. Again, very tip dependent. And again, that's where I recommend going with a nozzle or going with an ear tip that has a narrower bore, or at least this particular one. I think it's kind of a combination of the narrow bore plus the fact that it tends to pivot a little bit in the ear. Just has the effect of slightly softening the treble without completely dulling it. I did also try Dunu candy tips. They also worked pretty well. And I also tried, what am I thinking of? I'm blanking on. Oh, of course, the ThieAudio E-type ear tips. And I found that the ThieAudio ear tips, they did dull the treble, but also maybe just made it sound a little bit less special in terms of that imaging. So for me, this was the best balance. Again, the AudioSense, I think AS400 ear tips. But the treble can also still be, a little bit on the crunchy side, just very, very tip dependent. But even when you dial in the right tip, it's going to be an intense sound, right? This is not a soft, laid back kind of listen. This is an intense, in your face, imaging focused sound that is going to be super impressive, but also maybe a little bit fatiguing. But I guess nonetheless, it's interesting that it's a sound that works better than I feel like it probably should, given the frequency response graph that we have. But that's going to do it for my thoughts here on just this IEM. I did want to bring in, however, a couple of other IEMs for comparison. Now, one of them I don't have on hand because I just loaned it out recently, but we'll use this as a stand-in because it's another similarly priced IEM, the Fiio FX17, right? $1,500. I think it's a tribrid set. It's got 8 ESTs in it for some reason, but they also have just drastically different sound signatures, which attribute whatever you want to the drivers. The Fiio is just a lot more warm and kind of relaxed and more kind of toward the realm of neutral while still having a bit of an excitement. I think the Fiio, the FX17, it sounds bassier, it sounds warmer, but also like not overbearing in its bass. It's just kind of has a nice sense of depth to it. And also maybe a little bit better sense of texture versus the MEST Jet Black. The texturing of the Jet Black is not bad, but it can come across, again, a little bit on the crunchy side, whereas the Fiio I found to be a better balance overall for me. Now, it's not quite as impressive in terms of its image separation, right, and that sense of space. So if that's what you are indexing for and you want to just kind of go all in, the MEST has kind of always been that, and the Jet Black definitely does that, and I think it has an advantage versus the FX17. But overall, I think this FX17 is just a more balanced sound, and it's more to my personal liking. But of course, you can have your own opinion, and that is perfectly fine. On that topic, another IEM, interesting to compare against, is this. This is the ThieAudio Prestige Limited, and I will have a full review of this one coming up. I just picked this one up at CanJam, so I will have the full review of this coming up soon in the future. But while I have it here on the table, I actually don't even remember the price. It is over $1,000. Also a tribrid set. And sound signature wise, I would say that this is also more traditional in terms of its tonality. It's not too far off of what you would expect from a Harman signature, which is to say, it's got a boosted bass, it's got a boosted upper mid-range, and specifically like the lower treble, which gives it kind of like a nice contrastiness, a nice spaciousness. And overall, like the bigger differences, or the biggest differences that will stand out is that the Limited is just a bassier set versus the MEST. So if you're looking for more bass, it's even bassier than the FX17 that we were just talking about. It's contrastier as well. So it's also, on top of being bassier than the FX17, it's still going to give you a pretty strong sense of that image separation. I don't think quite on par with the MEST. That still is an advantage that you get here, but it is going to be overall a slightly more relaxing sound, although I wouldn't describe the Limited as a particularly relaxing IEM. It's got a good sense of contrast about it. It's got a good sense of separation between instruments. It's got, some liveliness about it. The one kind of caveat, or the one, I don't think where I think that the Limited is behind the MEST is in that sense of texturing, right? It does sound a little bit smoothed over, maybe even a little bit artificial in its timbre, whereas the MEST, while it's got kind of a weirder driver configuration, does have, I think, a better sense of texturing, which makes things sound maybe a little bit more realistic and a little bit less artificial, I suppose. But that's going to bring me to my last IEM to compare, which is this, the Dunu Glacier. Price on this is $1,350, I believe. A weird price, but that is what the price is. And it is a tribrid set as well. Dynamic driver for the bass, balanced armatures, ESTs, all that stuff. And well, here's actually kind of an interesting comparison in terms of the build quality, because I think both of these are special in a way that the other two IEMs that we just talked about are not really. I think the Jet Black, it's made out of ceramic, which is cool, and it looks very unique, whereas the Glacier is made out of, I believe, a stainless steel. And while a glossy stainless steel design probably shouldn't be that unique and attractive, the way that they've sculpted it actually works out pretty well. I think I really like, well, sorry, I don't think I really like, I love the look of the Glacier. I'd say that also fit and comfort, the Glacier is just a much stronger fit for me personally than the Jet Black, and also there's no driver flex issues with the Glacier as well. So for me, that would be my preference in terms of build quality. But in terms of sound, again, there's trade-offs here, right? The Glacier is more of a Harman tune sound, but it's also kind of an extreme Harman tune. It's got more bass than Harman. It's got, well, about as much upper mids and lower treble as you would expect. So it makes it overall kind of a traditional V-shaped sound signature that is nice and meaty in the bass, whereas the Jet Black is not, that's not what this does, right? This is not, it's got decent bass. It's just not a bass monster, whereas the bass on the Glacier is frankly pretty standout. I think image separation is still going to be a strong advantage to the MEST, but that's not to say that the Glacier is any slouch in the imaging. I think the imaging is quite nice on this. It's more of a sense of depth, though, rather than like a sense of kind of lateralness to it, at least to my ear. That's how I kind of usually interpret a brighter sound signature versus a bassier sound signature. But apart from that, I think that overall, like, this is just a smoother sound, right? This is pretty aggressive in its treble, which can be exciting, can be engaging, and it can contribute to a really impressive imaging. But it can also make it a little bit on the fatiguing side, whereas the Glacier, the thing that's probably going to be the most fatiguing about it is its bass, which is not, I don't think, particularly overbearing, but it is a hard-hitting bass, and it is a very satisfying, dense bass, whereas over here on the Jet Black, it is a good bass, but not really standout. So, I don't know, anything else to talk about in terms of this comparison? I do think that this does a little bit better job of texturing versus the LTD, which we were just talking about. Actually kind of similar in terms of a lot of its strengths and weaknesses versus the LTD. The Glacier has a pretty similar frequency response graph, but I do think that it is a more textured sound. And yeah, I don't know, probably about on par with the MEST, but also sounding maybe a little bit more natural. So for me, my preference is still probably going to be for the Glacier, but that will do it for my thoughts here on the MEST Jet Black edition. I guess kind of back to the original premise of this review, right? Years ago, I heard this IEM. I was super impressed with it, and I gave it, in my mind, a 5-star review. Do I still think it's that good? I'll be honest. I think it's a little bit more specialist than maybe what I'm looking for these days. I think it's exciting. It's a very engaging set, and it is as impressive in the imaging as I remember once I dialed in the ear tips. But it's not quite the all-rounder sound. And honestly, a big issue that I have with this IEM in terms of my enjoyment with it is that driver flex. I think that it is, I don't get, there's a lot of really expensive IEMs that have that issue. And it surprises me because I find it really annoying and irritating. But nonetheless, I did enjoy this IEM. Out of 5 stars, I think it's a good IEM. I'm gonna give it a solid 3 stars out of 5. If you wanna check out the unique melody MEST Jet Black, of course, I'll have it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't yet, well, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, join me on Discord, and I'll catch you in the next super review. Cheers.
Join with the force of reviews. We now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit.